I think it insults people's intelligence to suggest that the problems being encountered in the NHS in Scotland, which are the same as the problems being encountered elsewhere, are somehow down to the Health Secretary. Is it, for example, the fault of Humza Yousaf that the kind of action that Greater Glasgow and Clyde announced last night has also been taken in health services in South London, in Surrey, in York, Scarborough, in Derby, in Leicester, in Nottingham, in Southampton and in Portsmouth, and I probably could go on. These are unprecedented pressures which we continue to support our NHS to address.
Douglas Ross.
How can nationalist MSPs actually clap such a despicable answer from Scotland's First Minister in Scotland's Parliament about Scotland's National Health Service? So let's ignore the nationalist MSPs. Let's look at what medical professionals are saying. They are damning about this government's response to this crisis here in Scotland. On Monday, the First Minister placed some of the blame for the grave situation in A&E departments on, in her own words, unnecessary attendances. But Dr Leila Peel, Deputy Chair of BMA Scotland, criticised patient-blaming language, saying, and these are her words, it shows a lack of understanding of the current crisis. We've analysed the figures, and Dr Peel is spot on. There are actually fewer people in A&E now than there were in the years leading up to the COVID pandemic. The problem is not unnecessary attendances. Fewer people attended A&E in the first week of this year than they did in 2020, 2019, 2018 or 2017. So will the First Minister accept that the blame lies with her government and not the patients?
First Minister.
Nobody, including me, certainly not me, is blaming patients. It is the case. Well,
let's hear the First Minister. Thank you.
Unnecessary visits to accident and emergency, unnecessary attendances and admissions to hospital are not in the interests of patients. That's why we are working hard to make sure that where patients can be and should be treated elsewhere, that happens. Now, let me just take the points made by Douglas Ross in turn, and let's look in detail at demand and why the figures that he has quoted are actually the case. There is absolutely no doubt that demand on our health service right now is higher than it has been for some time. If we look at calls to NHS 24, over the festive period, the highest demand in a decade. If we look at emergency calls to the Scottish Ambulance Service, higher in the most recent week than the average of the 4 weeks before that. The reason that they are not all translating into attendances at accident, emergency or admissions to hospital is because of the work NHS 24 and the Scottish Ambulance Service are doing to avoid that. So the NHS 24 now provides advice and, where necessary, treatment to the vast majority of patients during the initial call that they make. In terms of the ambulance service, most of the calls to the ambulance service are treated through see and treat, so the patients are not taken to hospital. But those, because of that, those who do go to hospital tend to be sicker and their length of stay is longer. That is part of the reason we have pressure on our hospitals. And the waiting times in E&E, of course, are a reflection of the fact that occupancy in our hospitals are so high, which is why we are focused on speeding up discharge from hospital where appropriate. And finally, Presiding Officer, we listen very carefully to, engage with, work with health professionals each and every single day, and it would be hard for me to find the words appropriate to describe my respect for our health professionals. But of course, elsewhere in the UK this week, we've seen healthcare professionals on strike. They've not been on strike in Scotland because of the work this Health Secretary has done and because of the respect that we have for our healthcare professionals.
Douglas Ross.
I think those words may come back to haunt the First Minister, but, you know, if we're judging Cabinet Secretaries on sector striking, I would hate to be Shirley Ann Somerville right now, I've got to say that.